All right. Good morning. My name is Gabe Dunn. I'm the Director of Brand and Identity Development at Ellenhorn. Thank you all so much for joining us here at Gould Farm for what we're hoping is the first annual event like this. So come back next year. I know I speak on behalf of all of Ellenhorn, Gould Farm, and the Austen Riggs Center when I say how excited I am to be here with all of you today. Before I hand it off to our MC, I just have a few housekeeping items to go over. First, you can all find an agenda for today and tomorrow in the gray pad folios in your chairs. We do have several breaks built into the schedule today, and we just ask that you be mindful of coming back to the group after those breaks promptly so that we can stick to our schedule. There will be plenty of time for questions and discussion at the end of the day during our last session, which is a roundtable discussion. So please jot down any thoughts or questions that come up during the presentations, and we will do our best to get through all of them during that time. That is it from me. At this time, I'm pleased to hand over the spotlight to our MC for the day, Ellenhorn's Director of Family Services and one of my very favorite colleagues, Terry Bryant.
Thank you. Good morning. I wish they played the Rocky theme as I was coming up on the stage. So my name is Terry Bryant, and I'm Director of Family Services with Ellenhorn, where I have worked for 17 years, lucky me. I want to welcome you all, and thank you for being here. Having had some personal experience with a loved one who lived with psychosis, my drive has always been to gain a better understanding of what's happening for each individual and family that I meet. And to remain curious, respectful, and kind in the process. And my guess is that's why all of you are here too. I want to welcome you to the first and hopefully not last conference on residential and community treatment of psychosis. A special thank you to one of our sponsors, Gould Farm, who is generously hosting today's event. And thank you to our other sponsors, Ellenhorn and Austen Riggs, for their generosity in making this conference happen. And thank you to all of you for attending today and for your dedication to exploring innovative approaches to supporting the recovery of individuals with psychosis. A central theme of our conference is the importance of recognizing the unique strengths and perspectives of individuals with psychosis. And we have a full day planned for you today with 3 amazing speakers and the opportunity of a roundtable discussion so that we may create a space to share our questions, approaches with psychosis, in addition to what we are learning from the people we treat. Sound good? All right. So with that said, I am going to introduce our first speaker. And I could just probably do this off the top of my head, but I will read what was given me. So Ross Ellenhorn, Dr. Ellenhorn is a pioneer and leader in the development and promotion of community integration services, types of care that serve and empower individuals diagnosed with psychiatric and or addiction issues while they remain in their own communities and outside of institutional settings. Trained as a sociologist, psychotherapist, and social worker, he created the first fully operating intensive hospital diversion and wraparound program in Massachusetts. Ellenhorn later created and led one of the first public programs for assertive community treatment teams in the state. Dr. Ellenhorn has authored 3 books on human behavior and is the first person to receive a joint PhD from Brandeis University's prestigious Florence Heller School for Social Welfare Policy and Management in the Department of Sociology. So it is my pleasure and honor to introduce my friend, my boss, Dr. Ross Ellenhorn.
Do I need this mic? You guys hear me okay with that? For the video? Oh, for the video. Okay. When I hear that description of me, my self-esteem goes way up, and then I remember that I wrote that, and my self-esteem stays up, which is sort of, I don't know what that means, but so I'm going to talk today. I'm going to get to a story about what are called the negative symptoms of schizophrenia today. But I'm going to take a roundabout way to get there, and that's how I operate. But I promise you that whenever you feel like I'm on a tangent, I've really worked hard to get us back from that tangent. I also want to make this as interactive as possible. I'm kind of in a place in life where I'd rather talk to you and hear your ideas and just talk away. So I'm going to give plenty of room for us to have a conversation. Gabe has assured me that I can go on for 3 hours and it's no problem with this talk. So I want to do that. And I'm going to talk about a thing we don't know what it is. We don't know the roots of it. We kind of understand the experience. But basically, we use this word psychosis and then the negative symptoms of psychosis and schizophrenia without really any understanding, just a bunch of theories. No one of them is the best. No one of them is proven. But I'm going to tell you, and this, I'm going on a tangent now that'll get us somewhere. I'm going to tell you that's one of the fundamental experiences of psychosis is a sense that the world has lost coherence. That the things that you and I do to create gestalts around us, meanings, that's a chair, that's a wall, these are people in a room, we're at this conference, becomes questionable and disassembled. And that there's one response to that incoherence, which is massive coherence, and that's where someone might become paranoid or delusional because the incoherence is so upsetting. And that's serious. There's another group in our society that actually has a much more serious problem, and that's overcoherence. This group represents sometimes 30% of the population. They're much more dangerous to others than people that experience this incoherence. They follow authoritarian leaders. They're called the authoritarian third. They're in every culture. They're always looking for just everything to make sense and to be homogeneic and to be simple. So we have these two continuums. One, psychiatry deals with. The other, the rest of us have to deal with, right? The other one is actually, in my mind, a worse pathology on some level, right? And where we want to be in our own lives is between those two things. A sense that world has flexibility, we can question it, and at the same time we have some sense that there's meanings out there. And the term for that, combination of those two things at the same time, is play. And I want today to be playful, and so I'm going to try my best to not be too incoherent, but at times also to bring us back to coherence, if that makes sense, right? Because I think that what I'd like to hand you as a gift for you being here is something where you feel alive and engaged, not bored. So basically what we mean by negative symptoms is this blow to motivation that psychiatrists and researchers think is sort of connected genetically to schizophrenia, that there is this experience where the person stops moving through life. Their affect becomes kind of flat, they don't engage with people, and they isolate. And the main theory about it is it's something connected to the kind of genetic thing that causes schizophrenia, right? Negative symptoms of schizophrenia are better prognosticators for a person's poor life than are hallucinations. And they are completely, you cannot fix them through medication. So here we have this thing that's basically the main thing that'll decide whether a person has a decent life, and it's not medicated, and it's basically designed, that's described in the literature as genetically based. And that's what I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to question that idea that it's actually physiological, and I'm going to talk about it as social and making a lot of sense why a person might start looking like this, considering the events that happen to somebody who's psychotic. There's a whole community of people, including Gould Farm, that believe that you really can't think about psychosis without thinking about what the person's getting in treatment. And we're often seen as left-leaning political people because we keep talking about how bad treatment is for people. But we don't think actually, we think we're having a clinical treatment conversation when we talk about the injuries of treatment to people with psychosis, that we can't separate the two. And so that's really what I'm going to try to get to today on some level. So I've got two parts, and this is part one, and this is where I'm going to talk about something I've been studying, I've been doing ethnographic work on with a certain population of a pathology that I call GOND. It's really prevalent in our society, and I'm been working really hard on the research on it. This thing's grandiose obsessive normalizing disorder. These are a group of people who have this grandiose belief that they can look and study other people and figure out what's wrong with them. And they think that they have the expertise to do it. Now, some of them are really well trained in kind of doing diagnosis. A lot of them aren't. A lot of them will say, oh, that's a schizophrenic, that's a borderline. And they have this, and they actually believe in these things. They take them as sort of just common knowledge, and then they sort of throw them out, and they believe in these things. They have this belief that there's scientific data on the biological reasons for mental disorders, even though there are none. There's barely any. And they walk around with that in their head. They're that grandiose, and they're that stuck in their delusional thinking. They're obsessed right now with what's called best practices. And they believe that because they figured out what's wrong in the person's brain, all you have to do is apply the best practice. And if the person doesn't respond to that best practice, they're treatment resistant, right? Which is another thing they do, right? They label every behavior in this way. And with little research. Do you know that this group came up with, I'm not kidding you, a hat. There's a hat for OCD, there's a hat for anxiety, there's a hat for depression. And then you sit in a chair and they put these magnets around your head, right? And then they tell you, if you're not responding to the magnets, your depression is worse than we thought. And they came up with a term for it that you see in some shop in Sedona or Venice Beach. It's called, what's it called? Transcranial magnetic resonant? No. Stimulation, right. There's another group that believes that you can actually fix people who have profound experiences of attachment and issues of self by helping them with their distress tolerance. And yet their research has only shown that they can help people with parasuicidal behavior, not actually help with the borderline symptoms. There's another group that actually can affect people. It's an exposure therapy, and it actually has an effect just the same as every other exposure therapy. And in this exposure therapy, they make you look at a light back and forth. So this group has all kinds of wild ideas. I could go on and on about their ideas. And they're all based on these kind of beliefs that they figured it out. And they figured it out so much that they're just so confident that anybody that doesn't accept their care is clearly resistant, treatment resistant, or resistant or in denial. And this group has its own kind of levels of denial. They get really upset when you talk about them as part of the problem. So I want to kind of look a little further at where this comes from. This group has taken a really important part of medicine, which is observation. Like, my life's been saved by a doctor observing my body and figuring out something on it. My family members have been. Like, observation and study of a person is really important. And they've taken that way of thinking and they've applied it to looking at people's behavior, their psyche, their soul. They've created this system where basically there's a belief that I can look at you and figure out what's wrong with you. And that I know better what's wrong with you than you know what's wrong with you. And the term for that is the clinical gaze, by this French philosopher Michel Foucault. It's this exertion of power on another by saying, I've got you figured out. It's a profound act of power to say, I know you better than you know you. And by the way, if you want to get from the abnormal category to the normal category, guess who you have to see? You got to come see me for all the techniques I've learned from that abnormal category. So we live in that world. We live in a world in which this pathology is really, really big in behavioral health. One of the things that you learn to start saying once you've met with consumers of mental health care who are critical of some of our models is it's not what's wrong, it's what's happening, and it's what's happened. And that this is a model that's what's wrong. I bet everybody in this audience, when you're suffering, you might be thinking what's wrong because someone's told you something's wrong with you, but you're mostly thinking what's happening to me. And maybe even what happened to make this happen. And part of the experience of what's happening is, what are these people doing in response to my symptoms and my experience? And for no group is that more profound than if you've had a psychotic experience. What are they trying to do? Because it's not making sense to me. This way in which they're trying to figure me out, the way in which they're treating something that I might have experienced as a crisis, as a crisis. This is a crisis. We have to get this person in the hospital right away, when I might not be experiencing it as a crisis. So it's a profound disconnect between what's happening and what's happened and what's wrong, especially for somebody who's having this experience, this psychotic experience. Now, nobody's fully in one or the other camp. Most people that are practicing in the what's wrong camp understand that something's going on for the person outside of treatment. And most people that are in the what happening camp, they know there might be something biological going on. And that's what the NIMH says too. You know, they say it's the environment. Nobody says this is just a brain disease. Everybody says it's environment and something may be going on. And we mostly play lip service, except for certain programs that are here today, on the cause of it, the wrong, and not on what's happening, that happening part of it. The what's wrong group say they're apolitical, and the what's happening group are often seen as political because they're complaining about the what's wrong group. The what's wrong group, by the way, is the group that ends up incarcerating people for mental illness and exerting lots of power on them, so they're not like apolitical. The what's wrong group says it's objective science what they're doing, even though they haven't found the roots for psychosis in any kind of way. They sort of have some ideas. And the what's happening group are seen as big-hearted hippies. They're kind of like, hey, we're gonna, make this comfortable for people and that sort of thing. The what's wrong group say negative symptoms are about biology. The what's happening group says they're about an existential crisis and a crisis in one's connections to others. And that's really, this group is why we're here today. This is what, in some ways, New England is impressive about, is the way in which we've approached, especially this area on some level, the way in which we've thought about this as a what's happening experience and how can we help people with that knowledge, knowing that we're major players in their lives and that it matters what we do and how we act towards them. Now, these two ones, stress and isolation, are basically the acceptable things within most literature on what might spur a psychotic break, in relationship maybe to something genetic. There are parts of our way of thinking, this what's happening group, that say it may be trauma, it may be some past event, it may be some current event, and what we mean by trauma on this level is a bad event that was not witnessed, where it was not disclosed. And the person is struggling with, how do I disclose this event? And that might be causing the psychosis. And for some of us, we think it's a crisis in the person's network, in the people around them. Something's happening to the family or the system or the community. And for some of us within this group, we think that there's some unsaid knot or double bind that the person's struggling with, and that's putting them in the crisis. Some two messages they're getting they can't resolve, and it's becoming kind of madness, and they have this break. Now that one, I'm starting to sound like that group I was criticizing before, right? That I'm starting to be have a theory about this, but I want you to understand this theory as I go on. When you're in this kind of knot, this is an important guy to me named D.W. Winnicott, and he said, it is a joy to be hidden and a disaster not to be found. And what he meant was there's a part in all of us that shouldn't be seen because it can't be seen. Not a shameful part of us, a part of us that cannot be deciphered or seen in every one of us. And when people try to see that, it hurts us. And so we always have to be found, witnessed, seen, held by others, but not seen in a way where someone's figuring it out. Winnicott was talking about peekaboo here in children, see, not see me. But he was actually trying to send a message to psychotherapists and psychoanalysts, like, don't start heading that way too much. So I believe that that's going on too, that experience. So we got all this stuff, stress, isolation, possibly trauma. crisis in a person's network, maybe this issue of a response to the double bind where someone's really struggling over how do I interact with you because the see me, don't see me, this I want to be witnessed but I don't want to be seen thing is so powerful, right? That person, the last thing they want in the world is someone figuring them out. In other words, an assessment might be the greatest injury to them. An evaluation, a report, a formulation. All those things they're struggling with. I don't want you seeing me. I want you to see me. I don't want you to see me. And you're trying to see the very core of who I am. So I fed you all that information. And I hope I wasn't too tangential. How are we doing? How are we doing if you agree with me on some of these things? Well, you're more likely to see a cop than a professional if you're in a psychotic crisis. How's that for stress and isolation? You're very likely to be taken against your will and brought to an emergency room where you may sit for 8 hours. How's that for stress and isolation? And then you're incarcerated on these units where something really strange happens. They never tell you when you're going to get out. They say things like, once you start exhibiting behavior that looks like you're doing better, you can leave, and then you say, what behavior? And they'll say, when we get there, we'll figure out what that behavior is. So you're in this maddening place of isolation without ever knowing quite when you're out. Those seem like pro-psychotic events to me. They seem what they call iatrogenic, treatment-created psychosis. And then, if you agree with me, you're in a system in which the gaze is always on you, that clinical gaze. Every morning, now you're in a treatment program. Every morning it's about, are you better? Today are you better? Did things change today? Your life is all about people waiting for this getting better and all about this idea that you've got some illness that you've got to kind of get rid of before you can move on. So now let's look at those negative symptoms again. Do you think those could make sense in relationship to how we're treating people who have a psychotic experience? Could you see how that could last a person a lifetime? You definitely see how it can't be medicated. Even this experience of catatonia at the bottom, like I'm not doing anything, I'm not moving. So that's part one. That's basically taking us through this relationship between our systems of care and psychosis, and I'm hoping we might have a little conversation before I move to part two if you have any, even just thoughts in your head or questions or anything. Yeah.
That's super interesting things. I'm just wondering how being brought back to family members and, you're talking about clinicians and the clinical case, but also I rely on adults who are experiencing these symptoms, and there's a lot of power struggle between who has agency for moving forward between the identified person and the parent. And that's the hardest part for me, is being able to counsel the parent or the family member on how to kind of go and drop that so that the identified person will be interested in moving forward with some kind of help.
Yeah. So I'm going to talk about this in a second, but first the person needs to feel empowered for them to want to talk to you. So most people are having these psychotic experiences that they're really not going to want to engage on some level, right? Because you're part of this system of stigmatization, and you're part of that system, So what we do know is there's this unbelievable, powerful thing called disclosure. It's unbelievable. It affects our health, it affects our sleep, it affects our weight, it affects people who don't disclose stigmatize people more, they blame people, the greater depression. So the capacity to disclose your experience has this fundamental freeing source. Remarkably, you can disclose on a piece of paper and not talk to anybody, and it'll work to free you up. This is the guy named Pennebaker did all this research on this. It's remarkable. Our clients are not given the opportunity to disclose. right? And so the first thing we need to do is say, what's this been like for you? Tell me about what's happened to your life. Now, they're not always going to be able to do that, but that's the number one event that has to happen, is for them to say, I lost track of my life. I was in college. I'm not any longer. My friends are moving forward. And to have an empathic conversation about that before we're having any conversations about symptoms or treatment or anything like that is to free them up with disclosure. It's a remarkable thing when you let somebody disclose. It's very easy, actually, when they do it, and they're not allowed those openings to have that kind of conversation, or at least for them to be taken seriously, you know? Any other things percolating in your heads? Okay. So we've sort of come to an agreement that just this thing, just the way in which we do treatment is probably maybe pro-negative symptoms of schizophrenia, right? That the way we do it most of the time contributes to the negative symptoms. It definitely doesn't help in alleviating them. But I now want to kind of move towards larger social experiences for somebody who's for most mental health clients, but especially someone who's experiencing psychosis. And there's a lot of research in social psychology about how we look at things as challenges and how we look at things as threats. So a challenge is something where you meet something difficult and you have all the resources to deal with it, right? So these two people are walking up a hill, they're doing just fine. But if there's a snowstorm, it becomes a threat because you don't have the resources to face this difficult thing. So throughout our lives, we're trying to decide which one's a threat, which one's a challenge in our own existence. And threats are the things where we just feel like, I can't do it. I don't have enough power to do it or enough ability. That's why if you give them a coat, the resource, threat becomes challenge. So, which I love because he's constantly living in a sense of threat, right? So here are the social buffers that create jackets for us. Like this is what they show in social psychological research. And by the way, the cool thing about these resources is they're interchangeable. So if you don't have one, you can grab the other. Belonging, connection, lowers the threat, makes it a challenge. If you feel like you belong to a group, if you feel like you belong to your community. Social support. A sense that there's a team of people who follow you and care about you and see your best interest in their minds, and you kind of carry them with them. One of the beautiful things I'll talk about social support is that people don't have to be in the room for you to experience their social support. Purpose. Big factor. If I'm on my way to something, all of a sudden, purpose also has to do with my value in the community. Challenges don't feel so challenging. They feel like challenges, not threats. Self-efficacy is a big one. I'm actually capable of doing things. I'm competent. It's another social resource that obviously would make something that feels threatening more of a challenge, right? I can handle it. And then I was talking about disclosure. Somebody to talk to where you explain what's happening to you, who's there to hear what's happening to you. All these things are what are called social resources and also called social buffers. They buffer us against stress. This is just a simple thing. This is like research is done over and over again. One person walking across a college campus will look at a hill and they'll see the hill is super high, super steep. And if two people are walking across, they'll see it as actually accurately steep. And you don't even have to do that with a friend. You can just walk with someone you just met on campus, and all of a sudden, that challenge stays challenge, not threat. That basically has to do with social support, social inclusion, our sense of connection to others. I'm going to show you this remarkable research. I hope the sound's working. But these are
okay, that I'm part of an experiment, and this is supposed to teach me something, but really, how I feel is pissed off.
I felt a little lost because we had all gone into this on the same level. And here they were developing their own thing, and I was just left aside.
I thought, okay, this is a joke, or they've got something against me, or I'm throwing too hard.
So clearly these two subjects went through something awful, something where they felt that upset. And in fact, the part of their brain that responds to pain, this pain matrix, lit up in their heads without being touched. That's a wild experiment. That's profound. That this person, John, the same part of his brain who's in excruciating pain, these people without being touched, that was going on in their brains. So they must have done something wild to these people to get them into that state. Well, here's what they did. They put them on a computer, and they told them that there were two other subjects in the room, and they were throwing the ball to the subject that weren't actually subjects. And then the two subjects started throwing the ball to each other, not to them. That caused that massive event in the brain that put them into a state of pain. That's how powerful ostracism is on our psyches. And in fact, Kipling Williams, the guy that does this experiment, he now tells people, it's just a computer program. There are no two other subjects. And they have the same exact response. That's how sensitive we are to this. So ostracism is this profoundly powerful thing in our lives that can actually put us into the state of pain. If you talk to most psychiatric patients about stigma and ostracism, they're going to tell you it's us that started it. They're going to tell you it was the day when I was given a diagnosis. And we have this term, mental illness, and it means head sickness, or if you switch those words, it means sick in the head. And we claim that this releases people from stigma. It's kind of insane. Like, it's a brain disease. No, you won't be stigmatized. And so that's this profound event that's going on for all psychiatric patients on some level. But for this person in particular, this person who's struggling with coherence, who has this issue of being seen and not seen, and who must struggle with the challenges of getting through that, this makes life feel threatening. Do I really want to talk to another professional? And so they're just looking out at this world, and this person is in some ways their greatest threat on some level. Social support. So like I said, social support is the experience of having a group of people who are behind you and are supporting you. It might be one of the greatest miracles of humankind, because we are capable of carrying our social supports with us when those people are in the room. So there's a thing called perceived social support. It's just as powerful as social support. So I have a strange cousin. My cousin does this research with this tarantula, not about tarantulas and social support, but he has a tarantula in this little plexiglass box, and he has a person sit in a chair. Half of the people in the room thought about a time when they had bad social support. Half of the people in the room thought of a time when they had good social support. Just thought about it. Doesn't mean they actually have those things. People with negative social support saw that spider. He lowers the spider towards them in this plexiglass box. Saw it like right up in front of their face. The people thought about good social support, saw it accurately where it was in relationship to them. So threats and challenges become this big deal when you don't have social support, right? Now, our clients may have people around them that are supporting them, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they metabolize that support, because they're so struggling with who am I to these people. They have become this source of care and source of illness that they don't know if they can carry those people around with them anymore. So that thing that bolsters us against seeing everything as threatening isn't there for them on some level. Jeremy's going to talk a lot more about loneliness, so I'm not going to take too much time with it. But actually, loneliness is interesting what they call it. Remember perceived social support? They call it perceived social isolation. Loneliness is when you're not walking around, in my mind, and you might have a different description, but in my mind, it's about not having your social supports in your head. You can be in a crowd and be lonely because you're not carrying those people with you. And you stop wanting to carry those people with you when they're all about your change and your care. Purpose. Purpose is directly involved in efficiency. We're more able to get things done during the day and thus be more effective when we have purpose, right? Like on a Sunday when we got nothing to do and the dishes need to get in the dishwasher, I don't do it, but if I'm busy, I do it, right? All that kind of stuff. And purpose also gives you a sense of value. It's a major buffer against stress. If you don't have a sense of purpose, you begin to see the world as threatening. Self-efficacy, I'm competent. I can make things happen. Self-efficacy is beautiful in the sense it can be passed from one thing to another. You fix a bike and now you feel like you can paint a house. It's this thing that kind of invades our lives in its beautiful way. And if we're removing people from becoming self-efficacious because they're in treatment, we're removing them from another medicine that lowers the sense that a challenge is a challenge and raises the sense that a challenge is a threat. And then disclosure is another major one. Are we giving people enough room? Not to talk about what's wrong, but to talk about what happened. There's no good in disclosing what's wrong. There's no relief in it. I'm broken. The relief comes in, this is how I'm experiencing. This is my relationship with that brokenness, if you want. This is my relationship with my suffering. This is what's happening to me in relationship to it. If you don't have that, challenges become threats. So here we have all of these things that make it so we can get through life in a way where challenges stay in the challenge mode. And we're talking about a person who's dealing with a profound challenge of a lack of coherence, a lack of connection, a sense of estrangement from the world. And they're trying to figure out, in lots of ways, in a sense of deep isolation, how am I going to kind of make my life work? And so all of them have an effect on this other thing, which is hope. Hope is the mindset that gets us through uncertainty to something that we yearn for. Hope isn't optimism. That's something for Reagan. It's the world's going to be great. Hope is Martin Luther King. I need to get through this uncertainty to the thing I'm yearning for. It's the thing that drives us. And hope is challenging, and hope can become a threat. It's challenging to hope because of all the potential of feeling helpless when it doesn't happen. And so it implies a kind of threat, and you need courage to face hope, and you need resources to face hope. We're sometimes not seeing the struggle people are in. We're kind of focused on what's happening kind of in their heads and not on that struggle over hope. Now back to these categories. Have I overmade my point? Are we talking about despair? And are we talking about a sense of being dehumanized? And are we talking about a person who doesn't know who to reach out to because nobody's quite listening? And yet we're defining it as part of an illness instead of an existential relational dilemma. So if we were to treat these negative symptoms, it's kind of obvious what we would do, right? We'd maintain and increase a sense of self-efficacy. We want people to feel competent. That's good treatment for that. It's also a good treatment for psychosis itself or the other parts of it. We'd want them to have a sense of purpose. I'm developing kind of this magical place if you think about it. Like all these things are happening. We create social support around them where they feel like there's a group of people that are there for them in a compassionate way that they can carry with them. We try to create this sense of hope through all of that. We give them a place to disclose, to talk about what's happened to them. If we could do that, we would be really doing a good job, in my mind, treating the negative symptoms of schizophrenia. And then we would also lower the clinical gaze. We would not be kind of figuring them out all the time. So what if we could make that happen, right? What if we could do that somehow? What if there was a place where we could actually have that kind of care on some level, right? And that's, on some level, that's New England for you. I mean, it's all over the country, but there are plenty of places like Gould Farm and like Ellenhorn, like Austen Riggs that are trying to think about what's happening with people. And I'm okay being a hippie in all this, but we're not the hippies. We're actually accurate. This is what people need. This is the treatment. This is the clinical treatment for negative symptoms of schizophrenia, and it's probably the clinical treatment for psychosis. This is, now I'm starting to sound like a devout model person, but it is the way. The other ones don't work, and they're actually pro psychosis and pro-negative symptoms. So that's my talk, and I'm happy to, I've got a few minutes. I'll answer a couple questions, and we got the round table later, if you have any. Any thoughts? Yeah, Ben?
Ross, you're talking about those, the hats for the electronics on that. Is that all government supported? You're talking about 3 or 4 different, distinct different approaches to a problem.
Yeah, I mean, there's some evidence that they actually kind of work, but there's these mills. There's these mills, these offices with like tons of TMS machines, and people go and they don't meet anybody, and they sit in the TMS machine, and then they go home. It's just like there's ketamine mills now, you know, and there's it just got squashed. But there was this idea that there was a miracle drug for trauma called MDMA, and we were going to take this miracle drug, and then we'd all be better. Psychedelic Conference just had a thing saying net zero trauma by 2028 or something like that. So there's all this kind of stuff, and TMS does have some effects. So I didn't mean to kind of completely insult it, but it is still this kind of crazy model. It does, you know, does feel new agey to me. Yeah. Did you have a question?
I did. Blake Bailey from Windhorse Community Services in Boulder. And I completely resonate with everything you've just said, and it makes perfect sense from our approach as well. And one thing I think that you alluded to, but maybe didn't state directly, has to do with environments of sanity, and how the mind and the environment are just kind of, they're together, they're one.
Yeah.
And how creating and helping to create environments where people can kind of wake up and feel connected to their actual living space. I mean, clearly here, at this place, it's just alive. And so that's just happening automatically and organically. Yeah. But when you said helping to set up maybe a household for someone outside of a hospital setting, I'm wondering what your thoughts are on things that can enliven and inspire people to maybe lose their allegiance to the interior world and come into this world.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'm kind of a fan of the interior world, I have to tell you. So I know you guys have a Buddhist base. I'm like a giant fan of the self and ego. I don't mind an ego nap, but not an ego death. But I think what I want to do is help the person create their own environment. Like, I don't want to miss any chance for self-efficacy. Everything in front of that person could be a self-efficacious moment. So I'd much rather say, how do you want to decorate it? And let's go figure out what we're going to do. And where do you want to put that painting on the wall? Or do you want to paint a painting? I'd much rather have them surrounded by the objects of their self-efficacy than I would to set up something, if that makes sense. I want it to be an expression of them. You know? Yeah.
I'm Dana, the mother of a daughter here at Gould Farm. You talk blew me away. A lot of what you said, I think, can be integrated into a family and into a business and into life. Are you okay with medication?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, sure. Yeah, it does some good. No, it's a central part in some ways, and the art of psychiatry is finding the right amount, right? We do this model called open dialogue. That's sort of this model that says, like, you don't need medications. And there's this book called Anatomy of Epidemic that ends where Robert Whitaker basically says, I end up in Finland at this hospital and nobody's taking medications and they're all doing open dialogue. And one of our psychiatrists went, and the doc on the unit says, we use medication all the time. I don't know what they're talking about in that book. Like it's a psychiatry is this remarkable science. Like, they've figured out these little things that can actually help in these compounds. It's just that if it becomes the whole story, we're in trouble. I'm much more worried about the clinical gaze and the medical model than I am about medications. Does that make sense? What that does to a person socially. Yeah.
Hi, I'm from Spring Lake Ranch in Vermont.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. Yeah.
I'm actually new to the Spring Lake Ranch community. I was in community mental health for many, many years. And this is fantastic, but I'm kind of thinking about how it is so counter to community mental health and the medical model, and how insurance drives treatment and diagnosis is required for payment. And this seems so different from how everything is structured in community mental health. And so I'm curious how you kind of see changes that would need to happen in order to shift to this and kind of the community mental health thing. Because these programs are great for people that can actually afford to.
Right.
With a lot of people on Medicaid, you know, they don't have options, you know, that may open their chances for more, you know, self-efficacy and, you know, building hope and things like that.
Yeah, I think my time's up. Thank you.
How do you see us being able to maybe make that shift in other programs?
Well, the really interesting thing is that programs that might charge more than people can afford basically appropriated remarkably brilliant stuff that was happening in community mental health. So community mental health is the birthplace of everything I just said today. Psychosocial rehabilitation, like they invented that. Psychosocial recovery, the recovery of hope. That all came from community mental health. They're just not well funded. But they're the geniuses behind all this, because they had to deal with deinstitutionalization and how to do it, and they discovered you got to do it by treating people in a humane way. They're just not well funded, but they've got it figured out. We need to follow them on some level. In some ways, especially in Massachusetts, where there's a strong recovery movement, there's a strong anti-psychiatry movement that is inside the hospitals and inside the community mental health centers. So that's not an answer, but the fact is they have the models in front of them. They developed them. They created clubhouses. They created PAC teams. They created residential programs that have a humane element, you know? Did someone else have a,
I haven't really thought this through yet.
Okay. Oh, great.
Yeah. But I can't imagine anything that this couldn't be applied to, right? Like just existence as every human walking the earth.
Yes, this is what we call a totalizing theory for everything. No, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Exactly. Because I was thinking about all kinds of diagnoses.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, but this applies to everything.
Yeah.
I could not find a diagnosis that this could not be applied to and work, right?
Yes, but I would say like, okay, so Ellenhorn, we got really into open dialogue. And so we had this idea that we would be doing this free-flowing, non-formulaic way of interacting with all our clients. We would never kind of tell them what we think's going on for them because it's against formulating. And it was really great, except that people that had issues of the self started to fall apart. The staff started to hate management. We started to say we're a program that should never take a borderline was the term. And so then we brought on mentalization, because mentalization does have this capacity to formulate in a kind way. So I do think that there are people in this world that need somebody to say, I think this is going on for you. Yeah. Maybe in a way, like with mentalization, it goes on for me too. I have attachment stuff. I'll tell you what my style is. I want to know what your style is. So I do think there are different ways we hold people. I think a person in a psychotic experience is not held well by formulation. And so we need to come up with a different form of care in that way. I don't know if that answered your question, but yeah.
And maybe try another question.
Yeah.
I have like a half-baked thought.
Yeah. Well, yeah, thank you for the thought. Yeah, but no, seriously, yeah.
Your talk really got me thinking about how important that perceived word is with social support. Thinking about what being under a clinical gaze does to someone.
What is what?
What being under a clinical gaze does to someone for a long period of time.
Yeah.
How hard it can be to believe that someone who's supporting you is not having that gaze after a while is really hard. And I think especially the longer people are in it, and I've seen in my lifetime more people are kind of taking on the clinical gaze, looking at their own life, that it becomes more about what's wrong rather than what's happened to them.
Yeah.
And that's just such a tragedy, and I think also just a really hard point of providing support, that you can't just provide the support, it has to be perceived as support.
Yes, so you said everybody's doing what? They're doing the other?
They're starting to apply the clinical gaze to themselves.
So I just want to tell you, like this guy Foucault, his prediction would be this gaze will no longer have to be forced on people. They'll volunteer to have it. Yeah. Like he was saying, that's when power will really win. They'll like, oh, I'm broken. Here's my head in this hospital, fix it, and then I'll go home, right? That we would get people to do that. And he's kind of right. Like we become this problematized culture, you know? I would also say like I might be giving up something about myself, but in every close interaction I have with somebody, my ability to metabolize their care comes from whether I think they're assuming things about me or they're curious about me. And I'm constantly struggling with that. Maybe I'm just strange, but I'm constantly struggling with, is this curiosity or have they figured me out? If they figure me out, I don't want anything to do with them. I don't want to let them in. I don't want to let them in. We don't let our social supports in when we feel like they're dangerous to us and their assumptions are dangerous to us. And perceived social support borders on a thing called introjects in psychodynamic thought. The people you hold inside you, and are you willing to hold them there if they're dangerous, you know? Yeah, Virgil.
So I'm curious. Thinking about self-efficacy.
Yeah.
And I too have always been more interested in asking a person what their dream is rather than what their diagnosis is.
Yeah.
But going that step beyond self-efficacy to shared efficacy or even communal efficacy.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you would help someone who's gone through the psychotic experience, that great incoherence, where they felt so out of it.
Yeah.
How they not only step into self-efficacy, but communal or shared efficacy.
Yeah.
Like those two people walking up the hill. When you do it together, the hill's easier to climb.
Yeah. First of all, I just want one of the main researchers, the guy that kind of started in some ways the ways of thinking about loneliness, says that the only cure is mutual support. I'm helping you, you're helping me. That is really the medicine. So we have these two modes. One mode is for people that are willing and want to be at a communal place so that their efficacy becomes part of their contribution to the place. And that's a place like Gould Farm or Cooper Reese, right? You're trying to kind of not just teach them how to be their own competent person, but be competent with others. And you're teaching them also about how important it is to attach to others because the group can get the thing done. And then you have people that don't want to and don't want to be in a place with other people like them. And that's where you get places like PAC programs, which is how are we going to get you not to do this with another person necessarily who's been diagnosed, but go to this yoga class on your own, right? Get a job out in the community with our supports, all that sort of stuff. So we do have these two modes that are about how to make self-efficacy into communal efficacy. They're not, people still don't consider them as the main modes of treatment, but you and I feel like they are, right? Like these are the ways in which to get there. That self-efficacy is the medicine. Because the minute a person can feel self-efficacious, the number one thing that happens is they take charge of their recovery. And we just know people don't change unless they're autonomous actors in a partnership on their recovery. And so they've got to feel like I can do this to be able to do it. In my mind, our job is to have a person build a relationship with their suffering. Not to say they're broken, but what is this in my life and how am I relating to it? That takes self-efficacy, and I can handle that challenge and not see it as a threat. It takes self-efficacy. Yeah.
I appreciate the talk. I appreciate you talking about the importance of disclosure and agency and sharing experiences. One thing I think about with negative symptoms that usually they emerge after a psychotic episode.
Yeah.
And that's often a moment where people sometimes also develop kind of a post-psychotic depression.
Yeah.
One of the things I've thought about, and I'm curious how you think this relates to negative symptoms, is also I think there's a question around after someone has an episode is how are they going to relate to what happened? And there's some recovery.
Yes.
And one of the things I think that's important is often people need to learn to grieve what they've lost. And so I'm just curious how you think negative symptoms are related to grief or a difficulty with grieving.
Yeah.
Because I think in some way you can see them as kind of a saying no to the world, saying no to the self.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I just want to say, like, am I taking up your time? I'm good? Okay. I really do think, like, there's a lot of first break stuff, by the way, that's going on right now that is about these things. How do we help you kind of go through the existential moment of this? And how do we keep you self-efficacious, actually? How do we keep you in work and all those sorts of things? I know we have someone from NYU that you work on you work at On track. So on track is thought about all these ways in which, at that moment, actually the thing we want to do is keep this person in school or work, and how do we kind of keep them in that place. I don't know if it's worth the grief until we figure out where it's going, partly. Like, have you lost something? Right? First of all, we know that, in the literature, 1/3 of psychotic experiences are transient. So at the point when we might be having a conversation about giving up stuff, it might be premature, actually. But I do think that long-term experiences of psychiatric events are also grief responses. Yeah, and that the way to deal with grief is to kind of imbue the person with some sense of hope that they can grab hold of their lives, and let them disclose. Right? They have to feel strong enough and valuable enough to kind of build a relationship with their grief. Yeah. Now, I'm going to say old school, but it's not that old. The job before, when you had someone who was psychotic, was to sit down with the family and the person and tell them you need to lower your expectations about them. We've gotten rid of that, but that was actually kind of your job, right? And that induces grief, And luckily, we're not doing that as much now, Yeah.
So back to the disclosure thing, which I also agree is super important, and I appreciate you talking about that. And maybe you'll talk about this tomorrow during the open dialogue, which I'm really looking forward to, because I totally agree that it's so crucial, but so you probably talk about it more, but I'm just wondering now what you think of when you're with somebody who's actively psychotic and there's that time before, getting help. And
Time before what?
Before they're getting help.
Yeah.
The disclosure of what's happening to you. I've worked with people who are completely disorganized around what's happening to them. Like they think they're going blind, or they have a stroke, or all those things about the radio listening and all that other stuff. And I understand how to, in general, kind of contain that, but I'm just curious about your experience and what your thoughts on disclosure when you're not really based in reality. Your disclosure is not really based in reality.
Yeah. So I feel like I gave a very simple and clear description. Now you're making it all complex and difficult. This stuff's hard. It's so hard to give a 45-minute talk and not say, and everything I just said is impossible. Right? So but at least it should be the goal, and at least what we should be doing is trying to get the other stuff out of the room. This is an emergency. I'm trying to figure it out, right? And when a person's more in that kind of sense of grief, and they're more struggling, are we at those points giving them the room to talk about to not say, well, you experienced symptoms today, but what has this been like for you? And to recognize if I'm right, and other people are right, and you don't have to buy this, if this person's dealing with see me, don't see me, that it's going to be a struggle to have that conversation. Because you're sort of saying, tell me what's happening with you. That's a hard thing to ask somebody. But we want to give plenty of room for that. And that's why peer specialists are so important too. Right? Having someone that can actually have that conversation. They're peers in their experience. They're not peers in their symptomology. Like most programs divide that out. Like Ellenhorn's 90% of my staff are on some sort of psychotropic medication. But what we're saying is someone who's been through the system, has had these experiences appear, Yeah.
I found in my work with people that sometimes just being with a person in silence, or partnered in silence, is a big part of the work.
Where are you from?
From Austen Riggs.
Yeah. So there's this place called Windhorse here today who thinks a lot about, what are you laughing about? Am I wrong? You see, she's laughing that she covers her mouth. It's like they're big in silence. But it's like attending to the person. You can be a witness to a person with having a conversation. And part of silence with psychosis too is you're dealing with someone who's going to start feeling incompetent pretty quickly in their conversation with you. And one of the things we do at Ellenhorn is we cut down the conversations. Like if we're visiting someone in their home, we basically go in and say, we only got 15 minutes. Because all we want them to do is feel like they said a few things and they left with feeling like I didn't blow it, right? I mean, silence is great in all kinds of therapy. But I do think having a person who's psychotic know that you can bear the silence is super important, because what they're experiencing is I'm unbearable. Everybody's responding as if I'm the cause of all of this crisis and anxiety and terror. Yeah. Yes.
I'm just thinking a lot about that existential double bind.
Yeah.
Our son, we found out he was having a psychotic episode when he sent us a 90-page email describing everything that had happened to him in the last few years that we didn't see at all.
Yeah.
And then, you know, it's this wanting to disclose to us what's going on, but at the same time, it's not real.
Right. Right.
And so it's been this, you know, long tension of, I'm kind of a fix-it person, so for a long time I thought, you know, I got this, Mike, you know, this is what's going on. You're feeling this, but it's because of this, and it's taken me a long time to learn to be curious and, you know, not try to fix it.
Yeah.
And I've watched now, lately, he's starting to sort of come around. As the negative symptoms for the last 3 weeks have been a lot less. It's been a lot friendlier.
Yeah.
And talking more, he was afraid to talk. So I don't know what I'm experiencing really yet, but what you describe feels like it. But it is kind of this, you know, that double bind. You want to tell people, but they may not believe you, and I don't really know, but I do know.
And that may be the very description of what he's going through. So as a parent, it's hard to know who you are to them, because he's struggling always with, will you see too much of me? Will you see not enough of me? It's an insane position to be a parent in this system. It creates its own confusion in ways that are just unbelievably difficult. I know when my kids are in trouble, I become helpless, you know. And there's this. So my other research is on this thing called fear of hope. So this idea that we can develop this terror about being hopeful. The research shows that people who have high hope and high fear of hope are actually the most agitated of the group that we study. So they might look like they're in despair, but actually they're so terrified of hoping again. I think that fear of hope has a profound effect on people in psychiatric systems, because they're constantly, everybody's getting excited, I'm going to change, and then something bad happens, and I've disappointed everybody, I've disappointed myself, and they develop this fear of hope. But families have to deal with fear of hope all the time. What do I do? He's doing better. Will this be the time? Will this happen? You know? And the demands of parents is to stay hopeful. And it's so hard, but to stay in that space, you know? Yeah.
I'm Stacy.
Yeah, Stacy. Hi. It's good to see you.
Honestly, as you were talking about the fear of hope, it made me, I know we called you, I don't know, it must have been 8 years ago to get a consultation, and for a client who didn't want to leave his room, he didn't want to do anything, he didn't want to engage, and it makes me think your response was, well, you just need to find some way that you are connecting. You know? And it was, I sat on his floor, you know, he's laid in his bed, and I said, I just want to spend time with you. That's what's important to me. And so I sat on the floor, you know, and that was sort of the start of that connection.
That's great,
Because he really, that was everything. It was too much.
That's great. Yeah. Most of my recommendations work out miraculously. Yeah.
And he's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, he's always amazing. But.
I mean, look, it doesn't matter what the person's been diagnosed with. Most of them are in a place, an alien place that most of us don't have to live in, where every day their job is to get better, and they don't know how, and nobody around them knows how. And yet they wake up knowing there's a group of people around them kind of waiting for them to get better. And so the more we can sit in silence with them, the more we can be with them in the moment, the better off they are than feeling like, it's another day where did this happen, did this happen, right? I mean, psychosocial rehab and social recovery is an event of hope. And hope comes from the person, it doesn't come from us. And hope comes from, the thing we can work on is faith. Faith in oneself, faith in others, belief in a life that's worth living ahead of them. We can help them with that. We can't really get them to hope. If they have faith, they can deal with the challenge of hope, and that's our job. Yeah. Okay, I'm on a round table later too, so I'll answer questions. But thank you very much, all of you. Yeah. Thank you.